From dancing in front of opponents to the greatest humbling experience in MMA history. These are the UFC fighters that were destroyed after talking trash. Number 8. Anderson Silva. The main difference between Anderson Silva and the rest of the people on this list is that Anderson didn't even have to use his mouth for somebody to make him look like a complete idiot. And that somebody was the legendary Chris Weidman. Silva mocked Weidman constantly. He told him where to kick, that he didn't cover shots, and he even pretended to dance in the octagon. Silva played a very dangerous game to get into Weidman's head, but he certainly paid the price. Yes, Silva was on a 17-fight winning streak in MMA, but you should never disrespect your opponents like that and should keep it classy. All it took was 2 punches from Weidman, and Silva was out cold with one of the most satisfying knockouts in UFC history. When the rematch rolled around, Chris beat Silva again.
Launch shots. There's a good shot to the body. Oh, nice. He checked it. He hurt his leg, and it is all over. Anderson.
Silva's always been a cocky fighter, but this man has to be one of the worst ever. Number 7. Colby Covington. Colby's become one of the most disliked fighters in UFC history, and that's partly due to his crazy confidence and trash-talking skills. These were a big part of Colby's plan to reach the top, but when Colby eventually got there, he had to fight one of the most terrifying faces in the welterweight division, Kamaru Usman. And before the fight, Colby went all out, saying, "He sucks, where's he good? Hey, he beat my sloppy seconds after I already beat them. He beat guys that were left for dead like Rafael dos Anjos. He came and picked up the scraps after me. He's a joke, he's nobody, he's following my footsteps. If I make a sandwich tomorrow, he's gonna try to make the sandwich the same way." On fight night, Kamaru was certainly the better fighter. After an intense battle, Colby was taken out in the 5th round. So the only question left was, who could actually make a better sandwich? I don't know if our next fighter can make sandwiches, but he definitely looked like he needed one on fight night. Number 6. TJ Dillashaw. In 2018, TJ Dillashaw was the bantamweight champion of the world. But after defending his title, he decided to go down to flyweight to challenge for a second belt. TJ was way too confident, especially considering that his opponent, Henry Cejudo, was the king of the division at that time. Cejudo had only lost 2 fights, but despite that, TJ still said things like, "I'm a true MMA fighter, I'll beat him everywhere. This guy does one thing at a time, I'm not worried about him. He's like the most boring. He's got nothing to threaten me with. You'll see me putting him to sleep." TJ's weight cut was a horror show. He looked terrible at the weigh-in and looked even worse in the octagon, where Cejudo took him out in 37 seconds. Dillashaw looked like a real clown that day, but at least he wasn't as intense as our next fighter to step into the octagon. Number 5. Joanna Jędrzejczyk. The face-off between Joanna and Rose Namajunas before their fight for the strawweight title was legendary. Joanna's losing her while Rose stares back at her, quietly whispering the Lord's Prayer. Man, that is some creep. Anyway, after the face-off, Joanna said, "Boogie Woman is coming tomorrow and she doesn't know what's coming. 6 title defenses, I will tie Ronda Rousey's record. I will beat the record of 7 fights. Now, I definitely admire Joanna's confidence, but that's not how it went down. Instead, Rose easily took her out in the 1st round and defeated her again in their next fight.
The striking system, it takes time, and Rose has finally mastered it. She became the champ.
A pretty tough night for the Boogie Woman. But hey, even Joanna lasted longer than this guy. Number 5. Ben Askren. When Ben was set to face Jorge Masvidal, he was convinced it was a mismatch. Jorge couldn't possibly fight someone like him. Ben claimed Masvidal was a brawler and a hothead who couldn't control his emotions, and he was sure he was going to win. He even said that he'd dominate Jorge, but we never got a chance to see that happen because Masvidal knocked him out pretty much instantly. To this day, Jorge's flying knee remains the fastest KO in UFC history. Jorge took Ben out in 5 seconds. Since then, Ben's chosen his words much more carefully. But even Ben's gum flapping's nothing compared to this guy. Number 3. Conor McGregor. Conor's lost to 3 men in the UFC, including Dustin Poirier and Nate Diaz. Because of Conor's trash talking before every single fight, we can include either of those two in this list. But for me, the ultimate humbling for McGregor came when he fought Khabib Nurmagomedov. Leading up to his fight against Khabib, Conor talked about Khabib's family, friends, religion, called his manager a terrorist, and even threw a trolley at Khabib's bus when he was leaving a UFC event. This was the peak of Conor's insanity, and Khabib's replies were always surprisingly calm. He insisted that he would talk in the octagon, and boy was he right. Khabib beat the life out of McGregor, and while he was doing it, he screamed at McGregor, "Let's talk now." That was definitely the best way to shut Conor up. And speaking of people who just can't shut up, number 2, Michael Bisping. Let's just face it, trash talk isn't an American sport. With all due respect to Covington and Sonnen, the truth is, the true poets of the octagon come from across the pond. And Michael Bisping is a great example. The man had a big ego, until that ego ran into George St. Pierre's return. GSP kept his calm at the press conference while Bisping was saying, "Dude, I'm gonna hit you so many times you're gonna disappear on the mothership." Bisping insisted that he was a much bigger guy, called GSP a midget, and even said that GSP shouldn't be training with Freddie Roach because he's only a boxing coach. Well, on fight day, St. Pierre looked extremely strong. The height difference was barely noticeable, and it looks like boxing with Roach came in handy after all. GSP landed a huge left hand that knocked Bisping onto the ground, and GSP quickly put him to sleep a few seconds later. Michael's ego definitely got checked that day, but at least it was never bad as number 1, Ronda Rousey. Ronda had the greatest larger-than-life ego to ever grace the UFC. And when Holly Holm humbled Ronda, it was one of the greatest moments in UFC history. Before her fight against Holly, Ronda said, "Well, what makes me so confident that I can win is I'm the greatest fighter in the world. I know that she's the type of fighter I want to test myself against. And I want to show the world why I am the best and I still have more to prove. And Holly is one more person that I want to prove myself against." Clearly, way too many people told Ronda she was the greatest fighter ever. And one of the main culprits was definitely Joe Rogan, who said, "We always like to use that term once in a lifetime. Once in a lifetime does not apply to Ronda Rousey. It's once ever in human history." What the hell was he thinking when he said that? Ronda took a huge beating from Holm, who took her out in the first minute of the second round. After that, Rousey fought once more in the UFC, somehow still holding on to her huge ego, right up until Amanda Nunes beat Rousey senseless in under a minute. It's a long way down when you're at the top, and that was the last time we saw Ronda step into an octagon. I wonder if Ronda or any of these fighters actually learned anything from all this. So there you have it, fight fans. From dancing in front of opponents to the greatest humbling experience in MMA history. Those were UFC fighters that were destroyed after talking trash.